Back to set. Now we're going to look at basically from that same PowerPoint, the last part of this, and this is what we're going to be using in class on Wednesday. Basically the same PowerPoint, and I'll be continuing with it, undoubtedly completing it, or at least using part of that first one for that one when I'm not here. I would think I'll be, generating another 40 or 50 minutes worth of me doing stuff like that. So we study not just the bone. It's not enough to know it's a femur. It's like what I showed you before with the femur. You have to know about the anatomical locations. So that's not. That's right. There's an older model which you can still see greater trochanter or lesser trochanter. You can see the condyloblasty, the conduct. This is the surface of the They all have names. So here's the difference between what they're doing in SP, the entry level students, we're doing. Basically, I'll ask them what bone this is, and I'll give them, it's the head, it's the neck, and it's the victim. Anybody can get this, for sure. As opposed to you, they're doing a little more detailed, a little more questions. Generally, what this is, and you got one of these, you got the, yeah, you got it. So I'll send it to electronically. So I'm sure everybody has it in case you say. Effectively, that's going to be your work. And I may modify it a little bit. And I set up about 20 or 24 stations, and we currently use it. And there's like 3 or 4 questions at each station. That's what it's involved. So we'll figure out the date. I'll know better probably after Friday Monday. Yeah, I'll make it a 1 week if it's. The Steelers lose. So you need to root for the Steelers to win. But what I'm saying is we have 3 different types. Okay, we have projections that basically create pull and tug. And again, Wolff's law, bone response to the forces around it, that makes those aforementioned trochanters, areas where you see bony problems. Surfaces where they form joints, they have 3 or 4 names. The head, because it's covered in cartilage, where it forms a joint, inside. Okay. And depressions and openings, stuff like pressure, again. So if you look at the skull, pressure, it's still, the skull has more of these openings, so I like to get it out of this first. More of these openings, there's fancy names for a lot of them, and you're going to have to know. So here's, looking at the skull this way, you have this large circular opening like this, and we're going to see some examples. It's called a foramen. The plural is called foramen, so more than one. So because it's the biggest by far, we call the foramen magnet. It's huge. Now if you look over here, I'll hold it up a little bit. I usually have something I can point to, and we'll go through these again. So you might take something like straw. I have arthritis. We do. Did you wear the black glove the last time I was here? Last week? It's a little better. We need to neighbors and stuff. It's true. Well, finally I get a response. I do this for a living, new. So here, this one, as you will see, fairly large. It's oval in shape. It's called the foramen ovale. Okay. It's interesting. Now, sometimes it will look like it. Understand, there's an oddity with bones. In order to get these, like in a real skull, here these questions just take a while. But in a real skull, they basically boil the bones. We boil them long enough, the cartilage melts. It's soft tissue. And it's interesting. Sometimes these holes are filled with cartilage. Nothing goes through them. And so this one, they call this one called the foramen lacerus. Kind of large over here. There's really nothing in it, so the cartilage. It's not the only one. So if you look up here, and you can see that there's this one up here, that sort of gash. Okay, it's called the superior orbital fissure. It is very important. You have several major nerves go through it, muscles that go through it to allow your eyes to move up, down, side to side. It's a big time place. Okay? As you see, there's one down here. We call it, again, we call that artifactual. It's filled with cartilage. It's called the inferior orbital fissure, but in reality, there's no gap. It's filled with soft tissue and cartilage that disappears when they crack the bones. Read that If you want to see, it's my favorite detective show. My wife, I am addicted. The British crime. The Brits love crime shows. There's one that has been running for 28 seasons. Since 98 or 96. It's going to be here on September 25th, a new season, which is here in Britain. It's called Silent Witness. It's all about forensic pathology group that basically does crime solving. And it's good. And they have, their budget must be immense because it looks just like your kind of people. They'll walk in there and they'll show you a skeleton that are you can do an anatomy person. And the gal who's been there for such a long time, she's really Fox, who's dead, still alive, really active. You hear what it's about me. It's history, old movies, British crime shows, addicted to sports, cooking shows. Moving on. So here, these are different kinds of bone markings. So tuberosities. Tuberosity, so I'll show you some of these. Tuberosity is typically a somewhat rounded but roughened edge of bone. Maybe the famous tuberosity is that thing you bump on your knee. Right there where it appears a patella or a kneecap. That big bump right on your knee where actually what happens is the patellar tendon actually creates it by tucking it. If you do the kneecap, the patella gets you can see how higher it's that thing you get here. We bump it all the time. That's called the tibial tuberosity. And the heel, I showed you that before, the classic model, it's called this calcaneus tuberosity. Walk on it. Well, some of it has to do with this structure that's attached right below this rib. So you have tuberosities, crest. Well, the one that everybody thinks about, crest, is this. Yeah, it's really that crest. On each side, it's like a ridge of bone extended. Just put your hands on your hips. You can feel your iliac crest. So trochanters are only in two places. They have very large, major attachments for muscles. Razor and lesser. Giant muscles. That's one thing about lower extremity anatomy. It's easy. Structures are very long. Upper extremity anatomy is much smaller. Skull is smaller. So, I mean, if you've got a hole, they're more recognizable here than orange. Again, it's all about support more than anything else. Large, stability, motivation. By this time, all the there's a little amount of nerves that make their way around. Again, there's a number of different lines. But again, I'll use the femur because it's one that's well known. There's a line in between these called the intertrochanter line. Between the trochanters. Elderly people, what happens to them? My age, osteoporosis. Hip fractures. Oh, grandma fell and broke her hip. No, usually the hip gave way because the bone was weakened. And well, your torso is sitting here and it snaps. The question is where? And there's a lot of science behind that. It's what we call, if it's transcervical, of course, the neck fracture. What's going to happen? The head's going to be bad. They're going to have to get some type of implant in there eventually. It's not dangerous because the capsule, this big enclosure, surrounds it, so all the bleeding is contained. So it's called transcervical, which means across the neck. The other set of these are called intertrochanteric. See here. Capsule ends about here, facing neck. And then this area is in there, it's extra or outside the capsule. They are relatively easy to fix and heal. There's all sorts of things from metallic hardware that's got wonderful ones. Good news, bad news, if you don't get attention right away, it's going to bleed out. So there's a greater amount of morbidity, meaning the nature of the break is going to cause a lot of health concerns going forward. Here, even though there's less morbidity, there's a greater. That's I have a lot of this to share with you. I was a general orthopedic resident for 2 years. In the New York City Hospital, some of the stuff I was talking about, bird, we suffer. And it's not just me, everything. If you watch that, they're doing the show The Pit, and you'll see it's just the kind of crowd. And that's it, that's trauma center. So that's a line. Tubercles are just smaller versions of tuberosities. And so here, we'll get back to it again, it's easier on the femur. I mean, the medial aspect of the femur is, again, typically they're bowed anteriorly. So concave goes backward like this. You know, that's always going to point to the midline, so I know this is right. So the adductors, that's how you pronounce them. If I had one that was intact, GFL, good luck. Got it right, all broken up. It's called piers, but the adductor too. You always say adductor. You always pronounce there's adductors and abductors. When you're adducted, you bring your parts into the midline. When you're abducted, we say it just like that. AB and ADD, add and abductors on the same. This is called the adductor. We hear about the groin muscle cage. These are the muscles that are involved. The largest, the adductor, magnus. So he pulls the groin muscle. It's not so much in the inguinal area, you can feel it there. So epicondyles are interesting. Anytime you have long bones that come together, this is so we those wires together. This is called the medial epicondyle. This is the lateral epicondyle. Condyles are where the joints come together. Epicondyles are ligaments attached. When you hear about someone having Tommy John surgery, that's the ligament that's involved. The ligaments are called collateral ligaments. So if you draw this out, undoubtedly I'll do it again. Typically, move them sideways view. So let's say this is your big toe, two bones make your big toe. You have an epicondyle here and an epicondyle here. The ligament goes along like that. So if you draw it the other way around, so any joint, go like this. Those are called collateral. They're on each side. They're both lateral, if you want to think of it that way. Ligaments. They are for side-to-side stability. If we want to open the joint, do something inside the joint, it's separate of those. Open it up. And that's something they would probably do. For MCL, you try to avoid that and go, because so it's going to take a whole lot of time to do some grafting. Yeah, they have blood supply, we don't do it. That's the big problem. Back then, when we were doing them 50 years ago, 45, 50 years ago, you sewed them. We didn't have, it was in its infancy. So that's an epicondyle. A spine is just that I showed you, the spinous process, as you can see here. And a process is any projection of bone. So, I mean, effectively, it's process is a generic term for bony prominence. And typically, the spinous process is probably. So those are all things that you're going to need to look for. You're going to probably need, we'll end up doing it next time, that's what we'll show you. We'll start looking at these and classify them as flat from what you've got here today. And we'll do a little look-see at the skull, at least to start. And I don't know if Dr. Badger has it in his budget, but I could probably front him $40. Big sport. Things that are in joints are very specific. Okay, you saw the head of the femur, it's covered in cartilage. Okay, sometimes you'll have, and I'll show you this twofold. The only bone that moves in your entire skull is your jaw. Think of bar plastic work. This is a condyle. Forms the joint we call our temporomandibular joint. Where joint, it's obviously it may not be the same as someone came through. Sits kind of in there like that. Okay, so there's a little opening in there, just some cartilage, and that's where it fits. That's the temporomandibular joint. What makes it a condyle, covered in cartilage, and it participates in the joint. So hence, we call that a condyle. So that's what they're showing it to you there. There's other anatomy. This is the mandible. This is the name of the bone. This is called the mandibular notch. Okay. This is the coronoid process. The big muscles that allow you to chew attach there. That's what creates that. It's called the temporalis. You feel the muscle up here. If we look into it further, you're going to see a little foramina opening here. Go to the dentist and they had a shot and they work on your bottom teeth. They give you one shot in the ball. That's where anatomy should fit. So if you're doing, I mean, I have a ton of experience with local anesthetics. You block the nerve, everything past it. But it's not, and even sometimes it overlaps. Generally, if you have one shot, you can work on it. Flip side of that, and the upper is not so forgiving. You have to do that more. Your alveolar protection. Like that. So that also covers us for notch. That's the notch. Okay? And that's the mandibular foramen. This is in the front of this is an odd name, it's called the mental portion. Don't ask me. It's one of those just to call. Because they call it. If I wrote in and said, oh, it's called mental, but that's always been called. So condyle, the sets on the ribs, they have tiny little places, but I'll show you one on that. Here's the cervical vertebrae. Smaller, and you can see the skull. That's supposed to be cervical. And that. When one vertebrae connects with another, these are called facets. They're little areas that have cartilage. If you want to say facet, that's fine. But we typically refer to them as facets because they articulate for the joint. These are called superior articular processes, and a little bit of cartilage, which is smooth, you feel here, are facets. They are covered in cartilage, like the head. And these, and so too, they're on the bottom, so these are inferior processes. Articular because they form a joint, anterior, inferior, articular. So, I mean, it's whatever helps you remember. And then everything else here are openings. So you can have something that makes a groove. If you look inside of any of these skull models, you're going to see little indentations that are there. And those are typically the blood vessels or ridges that are associated with the brain. They form a series of grooves. There's lots of grooves. Maybe the most famous groove is in the upper extremities, large. So it's easier for you and I to identify. These are called tubercles. So you have two tubercles that are on the humerus. Okay, greater and lesser. This one actually is greater. This is lesser where you sit. They're there, and this is the intertubercular groove. Okay, that bicipital, when you hear about somebody who tears a biceps tendon, it's not tearing a tendon, it jumps out of this groove. It tears up, it tears out like a football player pushing. That classic. and tear a bicep. You know, you have to take somebody out for the whole tissue, but also you make the jets hard. So this was triceps. So that's a groove that's there. A fissure is just that. I showed you the fissure in the eye. Again, that one's artifactual because nothing is there. And they're pointing to what's called the maxillary foramen. So the maxilla is the bone that's your upper jaw here. And yes, just like they're showing you, there's a little hole there. Nothing goes through it. Okay, it's another one that's filled with cartilage. It's an artifact. You compare the bone. As far as I know, nothing relevant goes through. But there's a lot of other foramina that we can point to. There's the notch. You can see a notch. There are several of them. To me, the most famous notch is in the hip. That's the one that's probably what you use for demonstration purposes. Hello. Human pelvis. This is called the greater sciatic notch. This is the lesser sciatic notch. What passes through it? This is the biggest nerve you got, right under the sciatic. And others, canal-like passageway. The most famous of these is where it's covered by your eardrum. Here, called the external acoustic meatus or external auditory meatus. It's in a bone, and that's why I like to have the bones to show it to you. It's called the temporal bone. The fact that it has a canal suggests to you there's an opening outside and an opening inside. So you have both an external auditory or acoustic meatus that's covered by your eardrum, and indeed, that defines the boundary from the outer ear to the inner ear. As you go past the eardrum, now you're in big parts of the middle. And the inner acoustic meatus is where the auditory nerve, which in the old days it was called the auditory, now it's called the cochlear, because it takes balance into account. The eighth cranial nerve, we have to go to all the cranial nerves. That enters by way of the internal acoustic meatus. It's the only cranial nerve that doesn't exit, because it goes into mechanisms of cochlea and semicircular canals, so you can hear my voice and you can maintain the balance. Laughing, falling over, laughing from the patients. That's a meatus. A fossa is any type of a cavity with stuff pushing on it. Cranial cavity. Anterior, sort of front. Middle, posterior. And that's where the brain sitting here for tongue. Creates fossa. There's fossa in a lot of different places. You see a lot of these areas, and a sinus is just that. Typically, the sinuses, when we talk about them, are around the nose and maybe some other bones. They're filled with air or fluid, and they kind of help your voice resonate. So you see, there's in the skull 4 of the bones, as you'll come to know when we do respiratory anatomy: the frontal, the ethmoid, the sphenoid, and that maxillary bone. They all have sinuses that are around, we call it perinasal, around the nose. And that's like you can hear somebody's voice is funny when they got a cold because those fill up. So that's what you see there. Almost done. I'll try to do the introduction to this last one. It takes us out of 6, we go to 7. And this is the characterization. We start to do the skeleton. Doesn't he ever stop? I'm very quiet at home because I talk myself out at school. So, bone, cartilage, ligaments, 20% of your body mass. The greatest amount of your body mass comes from muscles, probably then bone and everything else. Axial and appendicular. This is 7A for your viewing pleasure. We are going to look at the axial skeleton. So I'll give you the construct there. For those of you that are still awake, those that are not, you're forgiven. We will not do the vertebral column. I will not do the bones, but I'll introduce them to you. The axial skeleton, longitudinal axis, your core, as it will supports the head, neck, and the trunk, protects the brain, spinal cord, and thoracic organs. That's really its job. Whenever you see something enclosed in bone, whether it's a tiny object within the bone itself or a big object that's enclosed like in between all your ribs, like your lungs and your heart, something important is there. That thing, if you look where that rod is going through, that's going through the spinal canal or vertebral canal. Your spinal cord is in there. Your skull is enclosing your brain. Anything that's got a lot of bone around it, we only protect stuff that's important biologically. Indirectly, we protect things, even your kidneys, okay, which are lying, but the vast amount of them from behind are covered in bone and they're embedded in the back wall. So there's a lot that goes on with regard to that. That, in that particular, whatever color you want to call that, that is your true axial skeleton. Everything else is appendicular. So you're not going to have to, as far as I'm concerned, all you have to do, the vertebrae, you're going to have to know some of the structures and where they come from. Like fair play. One of the questions will have 3 vertebrae from 3 different regions, from cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. You have to pick which is which. And there'll be another structure in there that you'll have to identify. You'll get there. You can do it. Whoever you are, you have confidence. Confidence is the key to all test taking. Like my attitude when I went there, go ahead, see if you can beat me. To me, it was a battle. It was an intellectual battle. I can beat this son of a bitch anytime. That's my. It's about attitude. You get that attitude from being prepared. Confidence comes from preparation. When people, I'm a bad test taker. That's what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm a lousy test taker. Think of how you study. Think of how you analyze questions. Think of your method in taking that test. All that, students ask the same dumb question, but they don't realize how important it is. Can I mark on the test? But if you can hold a marker, I suppose you can mark on it. What a dumb question. Are you physically able to do so? Can suggest the ability, then you can say may is for permission. I love doing that with their vocabulary. But nevertheless, the whole idea, while you can mark on it, you can underline keywords, you can look for questions, you have to answer. And every test has slam dunk questions. It's on you if you miss those. It has extremely hard questions. Those, if you can get a couple of those, you're golden. It's those in-between questions that you've got to get the vast majority of. Because the slam, who's buried in Grant's tomb questions, you're supposed to get. And there's always, we do that second thirds. Get all the easy, get a fair share of the medium, and hopefully you can get some of them, even if you can do educated guessing, which means you eliminate the wrong answers. What do we call in educational psychology? What do we call wrong answers? Distractors. They're there to distract you. Don't fall for the trap. He might have said that. Well, did you hear him or not? I don't know. But that's where you have, and you get used to how that person, and you always have to, the first test is always difficult because you're not used to that instructor. What their nuances, what do they consider important? How can I determine from what you can determine what I am saying? Other than me throwing bits like that. If I throw it out to you, I'm don't tell tales out of school. If I say it, I believe it. There's the back, the skull, 2 sets of bone. Here's how you memorize. Cranial and facial. Cranium means they surround the brain. Facial means they make up your face. All your gorgeous faces, from my perspective, not the guys. All your attractive faces will include it. You can't say that anymore. Right? Like sometimes I'll see, it's awful. I'll see somebody changes their hair or wears a nice outfit. You want to say, my dad would say compliment to them. Man, you can't do that. You think you're a predator. What was you say? You look terrible. It's a different world, everybody. Yeah, give me the concept. Clear up, bright smile. Take right and smiling. Friend of ours, his friend of his, we also look very much musician. We used to do a lot of music. Had a great music. Just say, cranium. There's only 8. And 2 of them are paired, so there's only 6 names. What a country. You've got it there. Frontal, parietal, temporal. Okay, and there's 2 of these. There's 2 of these. Occipital. Not done yet. Sphenoid and ethmoid. TH-M-O-I-D. That's all. 8 total. 6 names, 2 right and lefts. Frontal, forehead. And again, you get maximum for your bump. You have that name. You have frontal, underneath there's a frontal lobe of the brain. You have 2 muscles, called frontalis, so you can move around. Okay? There's really no remarkable anatomy. There's a ridge here called the supraorbital ridge, just like the graph, the eyebrows. Some people it's more distinctive than others, so it's not. Just depends. What's unique about it in the context, and this is another, here's another type. There are 7 bones that make up the orbit. The orbit is the socket for your eye. You need to know any 4. Okay. 4 out of 7. You can be super short. This is one of the bones that makes up the orbit. The parietum, sides of your head, top of your head. There's no anatomical features. What you will learn, we'll do it now, actually. What you'll learn is these markings are where the bones come together, they're called sutures. They look like the old days when people didn't do very cosmetic work. This how when you sew things together, they had that sort of like, track like up here, very, very good. So called sutures. Indeed, that's a joint that we're called. So any of the sutures, whether it's, and we'll go over where they're associated with. This is called the frontal, coronal suture, this is sagittal, this is lambdoidal, which looks like it's upside down Y, so you have that Greek letter lambda, formal version of it. You got another suture over here, called squamous, it's a little bit different. Okay. That's where squamous actually got its name, it's sort of overline. They don't have the bottle. But nonetheless, that's a big thing. There's no bony stuff that's associated. After that, things get complicated. So that's not the temporal. There's 2 of those. There's a ton. So here there's a lot of anatomy associated with this. See it? The occipital has a couple of major structures. Really, the large opening on its inferior surface where brain becomes the spinal cord. For the brain stem, foramen magnum, that's a big player. It's also where it sits on top of the spine, they're called occipital condyles, those are on the handout already. So those are the big things. And lastly, the nerve that allows you to stick out your tongue goes to a canal that I'll point to. That's why I don't have those models. The hypoglossal, which means under your tongue. Glossal is tongue, hypo is below. The hypoglossal canal. Show you that. Now we have Bob asked Dr. Rob has that. These last two both have a lot of anatomy. So, a lot of anatomy for both of these. Save it for later. These are always do last week, there's so much to it. And both of those contribute 3 of the bones of these 8. 6 named bones are part of the organ. Facial bones are just that. There's 14. Yeah. It's terrible. Yep. Okay. Most of them are paired. The only ones that are single. Okay. The mandible, if you're shooting, started off with 2 pieces. Symmetric. We would have a right and left section. Why we consider this one bone? When we're born, it has lower fused. That's why it's considered a single bone. So that has by far and away the most anatomy. We have the mandible, the only one that moves. That's the big thing. You have the vomer. I don't even have something about that. The vomer is bone, your nasal septum, the divider that goes to cartilage. It's got a piece of bone from the ethmoid bone and the vomer. In the upper line, I'll show you, we have some good illustrations of it, and I'll find them in the vomer. So you'll be able to see it. All the rest of those are the single. Everything else, if I remember them all, the maxilla, the maxillary bone, the one that is that obviously is part of the orbit. That's here. You get your upper jaw. There's 2 of those, and yes, it's part of it. So that's in there. On the side, when you talk about your cheekbone, most of us look at this. That's really a cheekbone is a combination there. Temporal bone, something called the zygomatic bone. This is known as the zygomatic bone. That your true cheekbone is at the edge, it's part of the orbit, it's called the zygomatic. That is also part of the orbit. And if you feel inside, it feels like those little bumps. That's called the caruncle, C-A-R-U-N-C-L-E. It's called the lateral bone. It's a little bone that has an opening you can see in there for your teardrop. The caruncle is where the teardrop is. And so that is the lateral bone. It's also obviously in the orbit. That's really important because infection in your eye can go into your nose, infection in your nose goes into your eye. Conjunctivitis in little kids comes from the dirty hands or mouth. Conjunctivitis in adults, old people as they get older children, adults, typically comes from infections in the nose that work their way through that. An opening is an opening, it doesn't go one way. You can burn something new every day. Oh, we got another one. Palatine. Now that's why I wonder where my model is. There's 2 of these. They make up, there's a tiny prominence in the back. You can't even see it distinctly. Back here, okay, bony part of your upper, when you feel back to the bony part, you can see the transition between bone and soft tissue. Put your finger in your mouth. The bony part of that is called a palatine bone. You'll see the illustrations, and I actually had my model. has, it's like L shaped, and the two L's come together like this. Together it looks like a U, but they're actually two separate bones. They form bony palate, as does the maxillary and the palatine. And then you don't have a whole lot else that's in there, okay? So look what we got. We have those two, 1, 2, 3, 4, 12, I gotta have 14, right? Doing very well. Got 8, 10. You have, okay, these are conchae, inferior. They really, to me, they really don't count, okay? They're kind of bones inside the nasal cavity, and a lot of anatomists, even though we have to include them, really, what they do is they give increased surface area. You have some that are associated with the ethmoid bone, they're called inferior conchae. Another name you'll see are called turbinates. And the part that is fractured the most is the one that's missing. Nasal. So when you truly break your nose, a lot of people get hit in the nose. They're pushed to one side or the other. It's not a broken nose unless you get to the bridge of the nose. There are two nasal bones, one on each side. That's the bridge of the nose where they're going distally. That's common. Those are, and you can see, so you have 7 bones you have to remember either any 4. You can mention these 4, those 3, any of those 7, 4 out of 7. Perfect. You've got 355. Aaron Jones is leading the league at 324. Would surprise you that most of us who are old enough to remember kids, the number 1 sport, baseball. That's that horse racing in Boston. Football was hardly watched after those.
So you're saying for the parental, when you asked about the skull, you just want us to be able to.
One of the questions is saying, here's the question saying, I'll show you a model that has an illustration, a square around it, name 4 of the 7 bones in this anatomy. Sam, anybody gets that wrong? Inevitably, somebody puts nasal, and somebody's like, I don't have enough hair. Why? Opportunity to laugh, and again, no. God, it's 5 o'clock. Enough. Are you done? Yes, we're done. I want to get the model where I would have gone in to show the individual portions of it, but without that, it's